Hello, everybody. I'll try not to be boring. I talk really fast sometimes, and I practiced this morning with a couple of my people, and we got done in 7.5 minutes. So we'll try and be a little slower this time. So, as you know, I started Microprose a long time ago, and then went on to Interactive Magic, took them both public, and I'm now running iEntertainment, which is what's left of of Interactive Magic. And you can see very early on, we didn't have a lot of ad talent, so I put on my flight suit. And since we were doing a lot of flight simulation games, I would pull out my helmet, which I guess we could use in the coronavirus right now, and put it on with my oxygen mask. And I'd be in ads. So you can find lots of ads out there of me looking pretty silly. And then I did one picture when we took the company public, and it was pretty exciting that day. All of a sudden, the whole company was worth about 400 million bucks. And then 2 years ago, my kids took me to a Mexican restaurant for a margarita. So I just wanted to let you know who I am. And before I left active duty, I was an instructor pilot. And the reason I talk so fast is because we'd pull the nose up at 22,000 feet, pull the throttle idle, stomp on the left rudder, and we'd start spinning inverted. And we had 11 seconds to recover, or we were supposed to eject, or we'd make a big hole in the ground. And I had more than one student who decided not to recover, and I'd have to pull their oxygen mask or slug them or something so I could recover the airplane, because I never really wanted to eject from the airplane. And this morning, the first thing the young lady said is, "Where are you?" So if you can see this good old map of the USA, here's Tampa. We're out here on the beach near Tampa, and I'm sitting in a room right here, and that's the beach that my wife and I will be at later this afternoon. We are quarantined, so she sits in the chair about 10 feet away. But it's a beautiful place. It's 79 and sunny here in Clearwater, Florida. And I don't know how many of you know what the Where's Waldo game was, but it was a famous one a long time ago. So how did I get here? My dad was a World War II B-17 navigator and a company commander in the Korean War, and I lost him when I was 8 years old. I marched behind this caisson at 8. I felt pretty sorry for myself, but I knew Dad really wanted to be the pilot of that B-17, not the navigator. So I decided to go to the Air Force Academy. I got those cool uniforms, and I thought girls would like cool uniforms, so I went and did it. Then I got to fly a bunch of cool airplanes, and that was pretty fun. And then I left active duty and went to a great.
John, can I just stop you there for a second? If you're sharing slides, we've lost them here, I'm afraid. We can't see them. Can I just, if you're showing your screen with us, can I just get you to hit the green share screen button again, please? Because we've lost them.
Let me see if I can do that one more time. Share screen. I am showing screens. And let's see, this one.
Ah, there we go. I got it. Perfect. I hope everyone can see it. Thanks for that.
Is it full screen?
Yeah, I'm full screen like a shit, so thank you for that. Sorry, sorry to interrupt. We just want to make sure we weren't missing anything. There we go.
Okay, well, I want to make sure they saw what a handsome guy I used to be. And this is where I am in Florida. So you can see that little arrow right there. And you can see this screen? Hello?
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, don't worry. We're with you, John. I can see it there. It's good.
Okay. So in 1984, I went to an air show, and I saw a bunch of cool airplanes taxiing in. And I decided, since we were a flight simulation game company, we needed an airplane. So I called my partner, Sid, and I said, Sid, I found a great airplane. We can buy it since we're doing airplane games, and it's only $1 million. And I hung up. He went berserk, called my wife and said, Bill's nuts. He wants to spend $1 million on an airplane. I called him about 2 hours later. I said, Sid, we lost that one. I got one for $500,000. And I hung up. And he's still berserk. He can't get a hold of me. We don't have mobile phones at the time. So I called him back about 2 hours later and said, Sid, we lost both of those. I found a piece of junk for $100,000. I think I'll buy that one. He goes, buy that one, buy that one. So I was always selling something. So I always knew I wanted the $100,000 one. And we took it out of the boneyard. We used it in lots of ads. And of course, we did lots of cool games, over 250 of them in the 12 years we did it. A lot of them were flying games because I'm a retired Air Force officer and aviator. So how did Microprose come about? Well, after I left active duty, I went to business school, the Wharton School, got in the big MBA, which everybody was doing back in the late 70s. And I went to work for McKinsey & Company, a big consulting firm. And then I left McKinsey and went to General Instrument. And my boss wanted me to do spreadsheets, income statements, balance sheets, cash flows for 5 years for 5 divisions with 5 assumptions. Well, I'm a smart, lazy person. So I found this thing called by Dan Bricklin called VisiCalc. Probably never none of you have ever heard of VisiCalc, but it was the very first spreadsheet. So I went down to buy one of those fancy things called a home computer, and I ran into something called a Trash 80. That was the old TRS 80. It was a Radio Shack computer at 16K of memory. Pretty ugly. Then next to it was this computer with some kind of fruit on it with a bite out of it. It was brown and it seemed to have 4 colors. I said, well, that's an improvement. And then next to it, I heard pew, 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 explosions. I said, what's that? He said, that's a toy computer. I said, does it do VisiCalc? Yep. Does it do that cool game? Yep. So I bought an Atari 800. I went home and did the VisiCalc and did my business for General Instrument. But I was fooling around with a computer, and somebody told me there was a guy in the back who had a users group. It was called the Smuggers. Some guy named Sid Meier. So I went back to see Sid, and turns out Sid was a pirate. Now, I'm not being nasty, Sid. He told me he wasn't stealing the games. He was just borrowing them for a little bit. He wasn't reselling them. He was just looking at them. I said, well, that still counts. So I didn't want to deal with Sid at the time. So 2 months later, Sid and I are at a convention of all the salespeople from General Instrument. They're telling us over 2 days how good they're going to be next year. And Sid and I sit in the back. Sid's the only software guy, and I'm the only finance guy because I'm doing finance for the company. And he says, Bill, let's get out of here. I know where there's some games. So we left. We were at Ballet's right there in a famous corner at Las Vegas. We went downstairs, and Sid kicked my butt at every coin-op game in the place. Oh, boy, I was not happy because, hey, fighter pilots don't like to lose. And I saw a game called Red Baron. And I said, okay, Meyer, I'll beat you at this. I sat down and scored 75,000 points. He sat down behind me and scored 150,000. I went, holy mackerel, how'd he do that? Sid, how did you beat me? He says, well, while I was watching you play and I memorized the algorithms where they were putting up the enemy. So Sid, watching the game one time, memorized the algorithms, so he beat me by doubling my score. And he says, but it's not a very good game. I could write a better game in a week. Well, you know, fighter pilots don't want to be out-bragged. And I said, if you can, I can sell it. So about a month later, he bought me a game. I took it home. I wrote him a 4-page memo on how bad it was. I gave it back to him and said, Sid, this is not that good. A week later, he brought it back and said, I fixed all those things. And that was Hellcat Ace. And I took Hellcat Ace and went to a computer store. And I waited till they were closed. And I asked the guy if he wanted to sit down and see my new game. He says, buddy, I want to go home. And I said, well, just let me show you. Well, he and I sat there and played Hellcat Ace for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, 11 o'clock at night, he says, okay, I'll take 100. I said, 100? He says, yeah, 100. What are you going to charge me? I looked around. Everything was $29.95. I said, $29.95. He says, no, you don't understand. I'm a retailer. I get half off. Well, I'd never heard of that before. I'd never been in the retail business, didn't know anything about it. So I said, okay, $14.97. He says, yep, that's a deal. So I called Sid as soon as I got out on the way back to the train to get back to my house. I said, Sid, we need 98 more of these because he had one and I had one. We got the local neighbor kid to swap floppies in the hard drives in the drives so that we could make 100 Hellcat Aces. And all of a sudden we were selling stuff, and all of a sudden we were making money. So I would call computer stores and I'd ask to buy Hellcat Ace, and they wouldn't have it. And I'd be an irate customer and yell at them, say I was never coming to your computer store again, and hang up. I'd do that 3 weeks in a row. The fourth week I'd call back and say, hey, my name is John Stealey. I'm from Microprose. I have this game called Hellcat Ace. And we sold $1 million of Hellcat Ace with just me doing telemarketing. Pretty lucky way to go. And Sid brought me that same year Floyd of the Jungle that only worked well when I was demoing it, because every Saturday I wasn't at the Guard. I was out at computer stores demoing Floyd of the Jungle. And then we sold Chopper Rescue, the first 2-player cooperative game that I knew of at the time, to CBS Games. And that's where I met a couple of our former employees. And the company started going along. I think it took us 3 years to get to 3 million. Strike Eagle was our first big success, and that came about because I asked Sid, we need to make a Strike Eagle because I want to fly it. I'm never going to get to. I want to make a game about it. And the big thing about Strike Eagle, when you first launched, the first thing you did was blow up something. And we always thought you had to give good returns on blowing up stuff. Strike Eagle ended up selling about 10 million copies. We went on to silent service. Gunship came out, I think, about 86, and we were making big bucks. And we were doing well. I think we did $8 million. And of course, Trip Hawkins said of Electronic Arts, anybody could sell Gunship. Well, and I was anybody, and we were selling it. And at the time, we were bigger than EA in Europe. And I started our European operation. So the 4 games you see on the left of this screen are 4 that I asked for. Then I hired a young lady to sit in my basement at the beginning of Microprose, and Sid started hanging around the basement, end up marrying that young lady. But first he took her to the Caribbean, and I had to rescue him because he left this beautiful young lady in a hotel room while he was out exploring the history. And that's how Pirates came about. And then Railroad Tycoon and Civilization came about. And when we were all knew what Civilization was, we were excited about it, we were playing it in the back. And I get a phone call, and it's the president of Avalon Hill. And he says, "Well, Bill, Sid's stealing my game." Civilization was a board game, as was Railroad Tycoon from Avalon Hill. I bought him 3 martinis, and he signed a release. That's how we got Civilization. We took the company public in '91. I immediately sent $500,000 to Gilman Louie at Spectrum Holobyte, which came around to be a good thing for us because we were competitors. He was doing Falcon, and we were doing Strike Eagle and all the other great games. And I sold the company in '93 when we got a little financial problem and went to play golf for a living. I found out I wasn't that good at golf, so I started another game company in 1995 after I got out of my non-compete. We did Star Rangers. We did Decathlon with Bruce Jenner when he still was a boy. And then we did Capitalism, an industry giant. We licensed Apache from an English company. We did F-22, and Guy got to go to the rollout of the F-22 as an active Air Force reservist and doing the game. And then we did poker games and bingo games, and we were doing $800,000 a month. And this was the company I took public. I sold in '99, and it's now back as iEntertainment Network, and I've been working on that for a long time. And basically, we had an online combat simulator called Warbirds. We launched it in '97. We bought it from a company in Texas. It's generated over $25 million. We got a new one coming this year. And next year, with a Microprose, we're going to have a brand new version of Warbirds. You notice down the right-hand corner that those graphics down there? This is a system written by the Microprose CEO. He's a great software guy. I visited him in Australia, and we're going to start using that system for a lot of Microprose games and a few iEntertainment games. So if you like some of these games from Microprose the first time, you're going to like everything that's coming from the new Microprose. He won't let me tell you about them. I've seen his development list. There's about 20 very good looking games. All of them are in the history of the original Microprose, and he's going to make some big announcements. I had all his game names on there. He didn't want me to do that, so we'll wait until he makes that announcement, and I'm consulting with the company and trying to help him get going. I'm going to take a breath here because we're right at 15 minutes. I said, here is the theme that Sid always gave me on how we make great games. We had to make games that required decisions by players with limited information that are time critical with significant outcomes and reward the player who makes the right decisions. And that's how we made great games at Microprose. And one of the things that's really cool, my wife and I, we travel a lot, and we'll get on a cruise someplace. And of course, I'm very shy, but sometimes I talk to all the people there, and I always find a few fans all over the world, and this was their favorite game, or that was that favorite game. And my most favorite time is when the guy who's in charge of the whole cruise says, "Bill, I loved your games. You want free drink tickets?" So I still get beers and wines bought for me, and it's great fun to see these fans, and I think the new Microprose will do even better than that. So how did I do, Dan? I made it right, Dave. I made it right in 15 minutes, as you requested.
Great, fantastic! What a great adventure! What a story! We've got a little time to play with. That was perfect timing with time left for questions. So we have a few actually from folk here. So I'm just going to ask away. I'll dive in here and have a look. So we've got some questions here, just in order. Steve asks, do you still play flight simulators? If so, which ones?
Well, I play Warbirds 3 times a week, and I have to go kill 10 customers because if they kill me, they get a free T-shirt, and I'm out of T-shirts. So, and we are still running historical simulations on 5 Sunday nights a quarter, and we're taking Easter off. But the following Sunday night, we're running Baba Black Sheep, the Battle of the Solomon Islands, and we're flying F4Us, and Japanese will be flying their 0 A6s, and we get 60 to 100 guys on, all shooting each other down, all drinking, all having a good time.
That's great. We've also been asked that physics is so important in flight combat games and simulation games. What were the key moments over the years where you saw really big advances? Were there kind of memorable moments where the tech leapt forward?
Well, one of the things when I first heard about this opportunity to talk with your conference was they asked me about online games. Well, I've been doing online games since 1963.
Wow.
Now, that's a long damn time ago. I was a high school student, and I was I won a National Science Foundation contest, and I was given 12 weeks at the Army Signal Research Development Labs in New Jersey, where I worked on helicopter simulations for the Cobra. And we were not programming, we were moving jumper cables around to do programming. And then we go air-to-air combat between the 2 gunships. And we were testing the Cobra 2 years before the Cobra first came out. So we've been doing online gaming for a long time. But as it got better, Sid and I actually played a tank game online at about 85, 84. And it was, I think, through our BBS. So every time the online games came along, I got more excited because I like shooting other people down, especially if nobody gets hurt.
We've got another question here. Sammy asks, with Gunship being such a huge hit at the time, did you find yourself becoming a bit of a rock star because of the success? And how did that affect your focus?
Well, Sid was always a rock star. I'd go to a McDonald's and I'd say, "Hey, you ever heard of Microprose?" And the guy would say, "Oh yeah." And he says, "Well, I'm the founder." He goes, "Are you Sid Meier?" So now Gunship came because I was serving on the Joint Chief of Staff. I was the first reserve officer to be working for General Vesey and Admiral Crowe, the 2 top generals in the United States. And Admiral Vesey called me in one day, and he goes, "Major." Of course, he was not a big guy, and I'm kind of a big guy. But when you have 8 stars on your shoulders, you're really big. And I'm like, "Yes, sir." He says, "I want you to go fly with the Army Guard, and I want you to see if those helicopter pilots are up to speed on their mission." So I spent a year flying with the Army Guard. And what I found was, and I came back and said to General Vesey, I said, "Sir, they're crazy. They were dogfighting in the helicopters. They were backing into trees. They were doing everything good. I'm a fixed wing aviator. They were making sure they scared the pants off the Air Force guy." And Gunship was famous, and Trip Hawkins did say, anybody can sell Gunship. Bill's not doing that good a job. And that went on to where Trip and I spent 3 different times trying to talk each other into closing our companies and joining together. He says, "Bill, you do the simulation, I'll do the sports games." And one more quick story with Trip is Mr. Nakayama from Sega called me. He says, "Bob Bill." "Yes, Mr. Nakayama." "I'm going to sue Trip." I said, "Why are you going to sue Trip?" "He's cheating. He didn't pay for Sega Genesis royalties. Get him on phone or I'm going to sue him." Well, Trip and I tried to get me to go in the Sega Genesis business with him. I called Trip. I called Nakayama. I got on the phone. I didn't make any money out of that deal, but I put them together, and Trip got very famous selling Sega Genesis games.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. We've got a little bit more time and a couple more questions. So Jeff asks, what do you think about esports? Will you integrate esports into your games, esports competitions?
Well, we have esports. We've been having esports since '97. So every night we go up and shoot each other down. That's kind of a sport, don't you think? We just don't do first-person shooting. And we don't have $1 million to give away, but I'm trying to talk to new Microprose guys into having air-to-air combat battles, and we'll give away some real money. Because maybe I could win and afford those T-shirts. You know, you never know. I think esports is kind of a cool thing. I've never been an RPG kind of guy. My kids are. My son, I've been playing games with him since he was 8. When Pirates came out, I don't know if you had ever played Pirates,
Oh
but
yeah.
we had 3 Pirates all lined up, 3 Commodore 64s, load, quote, star, quote, comma, 8. At the time, the UK had cassettes, so we had to make sure they worked on cassettes. And the big thing about cassettes, it'd load for 20 minutes and then it'd blow up. So we enjoyed the Pirates. We set the 3 kids and I would sit down there, and whoever had to go to the bathroom lost their spot at Pirates. So what the heck? So esports is something I think is terrific. I have met a couple of sports teams. I know the United States Air Force and the United States Army are sponsoring esports now, and it's basically to recruit people like me that want to go fly airplanes or go drop out of airplanes.
On that note, I've got another question here from Steve, who says, by the way, that he could listen to your stories all night.
Wait a minute, it goes better with a glass of wine. They get even better.
We have got a few more minutes. So he asks, how close do you think aerial combat games get to your real experiences? Obviously, playing a computer game is the closest most of us will ever get. How close are they?
I taught flying for 5 years. I spun the airplane from 22,000 feet. We did air to air. We did all that kind of stuff for kids in pilot training. And I've been trying to tell the United States Air Force since 1985, if they may give me a computer and let these guys practice, we could cut flight time in half. We could make better pilots out. But that's what they were afraid of. They didn't want to lose the flight time. They thought Congress would cut the money to them. So let me get this straight. You don't mind if people learn slower. You just don't want to get your budget cut. I thought it was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I actually went to ATC, which is the Air Training Command down in San Antonio. I stood there and presented it, and the people that were most interested were the Canadians. The Air Force guy said, this is really cool, and I've got 2 3-star generals that play my game regularly, and they're not as good as they think they are in the real airplane. But I can tell you, computer simulation is the way to go for all training.
Absolutely. No, that's incredible. And on that note, actually, Sammy asks, are you looking at VR at all, virtual reality, for any of your products?
Am I looking? Let me get this straight. I'm a very senior citizen. I'm looking for going into my home here shortly because my wife says she's going to drop me off at the VA. But we do have 14 grandbabies I'm trying to teach to play golf. But I know Microprose, the other half of Microprose is a defense company. And I think you'll hear about that shortly. The guy, David Ligeti, running it is a very brilliant guy. And he's been in the defense industry for 20 years doing virtual reality for 20 years. So I can assure you that the new Microprose is going to bring a bunch of those VR games, a bunch of Microprose type simulations, air combat, esports. They're going to knock your socks off. And I'm going to stand right there next to David and go drink Australian beer with him once a year.
Jez asks a question. When you were involved in the simulation games, was it about gameplay first or reality of experience first? How do you balance that?
That's a really tough question because in Warbirds right now, we have a bunch of volunteers and they all want to do the flight, this flight model, that flight model. They argue about, and I'm going to give you a good example. We did F-15 Strike Eagle. We had a bulletin board at the time, and we got all these people that said that we weren't doing it right. And one guy explained exactly why we weren't doing it. Now, we hired George Wargo. He played lacrosse with me at the Air Force Academy. He also had about 5,000 hours in the F-15. So we get up there and say, well, how many hours do you have in the F-15? The guy says, well, none, but I've read about it. And George says, I got 5,000 hours in the F-15, fully loaded. The F-15 can't climb above 25,000 feet. That's why we take off, climb high, hit the tanker, and then go to the target. So let's be very clear. Everybody thinks they know what it is. I was always, and Sid was always about the experience. And then we had a very famous guy, and I'd like to sing out about Arnold Hendrick. If you don't know Arnold Hendrick, you should look him up. Great game designer. He did all the designs for almost all of our first military sims. And Arnold would sit in my office. We'd argue about this stuff back and forth and back and forth. But what my job is to make it fun. So you got to blow up stuff quick. You got to have some return quick. But Arnold wrote the 300-page manuals we used to have in Microprose.
That's amazing. I've got a question for myself, actually, which is you've seen so much of the games industry over the years. Do you have any advice for people who want to get into the games industry now? Game makers who might be watching this, for instance, any developers. What do you say to people who want to get started?
Well, I think everybody thinks they're a game designer, me included. So I think there's a lot more. And I talk to kids all the time that says, "Oh, he's really good at games. He wants to get in the games." I said, "Well, what part is he going to be? In the brilliant technician, the brilliant mathematician, the brilliant programmer, the brilliant artist, the brilliant project manager?" So find a specialty, find something you want to be in the game, and be brilliant at that, and learn to work with other people. Because too many of my employees could never work with other people. A famous game programmer, Silas Warner, who's gone now, but he did the original Wolfenstein, turned into Doom. Well, we had a secretary that had to check his clothes every day to make sure he smelled good enough to be in the office. So I can tell you, you got to pick what you're going to do. Be good at it. I was good at sales and I was good at testing. I tested all Sid's game, and we had one quick incident where Sid didn't want to put a deck gun on silent service. Now I said, "Sid, we need a deck gun." He says, "No, there was no deck guns until 44. See, that was that simulation versus gameplay. I said, "Sid, I'm going to Sears. I'm going to sell Sears. I need a deck gun." He said, "Wow, God damn it." And he put the deck gun on. So I go there. I got 25 Sears executives watching me on a Commodore 64, believe it or not, and on a big screen. And I try to sink these 3 Japanese destroyers. I get one of them. 2 of them are chasing me. They've depth charged me. I'm on the surface. I use my deck gun, kill them both, and they bought 50,000 copies of Silent Service. So you got to mix and match them so that it makes a good game and something fun to do.
That's amazing. Look, we've kind of run out of time. We're going to have to welcome our next panelist to the stage soon. So I just want to say thank you very much for being with us. A real pleasure. Also, I'm just going to say thank you to Fraser, who's your PR guy. He's asked a question about that in the audience. Bill, fantastic. I'm going to give you a round of applause. Unfortunately, you won't be able to hear from all the other people who'll see this because of the strange nature of this, but I hope you'll join us again maybe for a future conference.
I would love to do that. I did put my email on this thing. I don't know if anybody can see that. It's jwstaley@ient.com. And pretty soon I'll have a Microprose email again, too. And I'll be working with iEntertainment and Microprose. So we're glad to talk. And I will be joining the PGA Tour shortly, I'm sure, as soon as I can break 100.
Fantastic.